Did you know that the Grand Central standing on 42nd Street today is not the original building? In fact, it is actually the third Grand Central to be built on this location. In 1871, Cornelius Vanderbilt opened up what was called the Grand Central Depot as a place to house three different railroads: the New York and Harlem Railroad, the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad, and the New York and New Haven Railroad. After investing in the railroad business only a decade before, Vanderbilt decided he needed an impressive building to showcase the success of his rail lines. Made up of a train shed and a head house for passenger and office use, this Grand Central Depot was not destined to exist for very long. Just over 20 years later, between 1899 and 1900, Vanderbilt's glorious Grand Central Depot was completely reconstructed, and the Commodore was not alive to see it. He had died in 1877 in his New York City home. Although the train shed of the old building was kept, almost everything else was rebuilt. The outside of the building was completely redesigned, and the station grew in height as well. The old Grand Central Depot was 3 stories high, and what became known as Grand Central Station was 6 stories high. The other major change that occurred at this time was that the railroad lines passing through this station were cut to end at this station, and all of the tracks existing below 42nd Street were removed. Like its predecessor, Grand Central Station would not exist for very long. The Grand Central Terminal we see today was built to replace Grand Central Station, but the name change did not catch on. Although the facade of the building reads Grand Central Terminal, many people call it Grand Central Station. In 1903, 2 architectural firms, Reed and Stem and Warren and Wetmore, were chosen to design and build the terminal. It was built in the Beaux Arts style of architecture, which at the time was the popular style for many different important buildings. It would take 10 years to complete Grand Central Terminal. The invention of the electric train enabled them to build 2 layers of train tracks that ran under the ground. The tracks run from 42nd Street to 50th Street between Lexington and Madison Avenues. The terminal was built on top of the tracks from 42nd Street to 45th Street, intersecting Park Avenue. Because of this, a new avenue, called Vanderbilt Avenue, was created, and it runs from 42nd Street to 45th Street. When Grand Central Terminal was completed in 1913, it was the biggest train station in the country. A mini city grew around the terminal that included hotels, office buildings, subways, a post office, and a library. The Grand Hyatt Hotel that is directly adjacent to Grand Central was formerly called the Commodore, as a tribute to Vanderbilt, but it was redesigned in the 1980s. Grand Central is known for its unique architecture and design. On the interior, the Grand Concourse is known for its vaulted ceiling that rises 125 feet above the floor and which shows the constellations of the Milky Way. The little gold clock that rests on top of the information booth located in the center of the Grand Concourse is another notable element found in the terminal. The other well-known clock is located on the top of the building's facade. This clock is surrounded by 3 sculptures of Mercury, Minerva, and Hercules. Grand Central Terminal is not just a train station. It is a monument built to show the importance of train travel. However, by the 1950s, fewer people were traveling by train, and the railroad companies felt that big train terminals were no longer needed. The land in New York City became much more valuable, and developers were tearing down old buildings to put up new, taller ones. In 1963, the old Beaux Arts-style Pennsylvania Station was torn down to build office buildings and the new Madison Square Garden. Many people in New York City, like Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, were unhappy that the beautiful Pennsylvania Station was destroyed. As a result, New York City created the Landmarks Preservation Commission in 1965 to try to stop people from tearing down historical buildings. In 1967, the Penn Central Railroad Company wanted to tear down Grand Central Terminal to put up a 55-story office building. The Landmarks Preservation Commission said that Grand Central Terminal was a landmark and that it could not be torn down. The Penn Central Railroad Company took New York City to court, and the argument went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. In 1978, the Supreme Court agreed that New York City could indeed declare a landmark, and Grand Central Terminal was saved. Today, Grand Central still stands in all of its glory, looking down Park Avenue on the east side of Manhattan. While it is true that travel by railroad is nowhere near as important as it was when Cornelius Vanderbilt constructed the first Grand Central, this monument is still used by millions of commuters every day. Not only is it a stop for 5 different East Side subway lines, the 4, 5, 6, 7, and shuttle trains, but the terminal also remains the home of the tracks laid for Vanderbilt's railroads, though they are now called the Metro-North. Although much more of Manhattan has been developed since Vanderbilt's time, Grand Central still remains located in the heart of the city and in the center of a large business area, which is why millions commute there every day. Even for those who do not use the terminal as a way to get to and from work, Grand Central is an important landmark visited by many tourists. Whether you are in the mood for a bite to eat, for a bit of shopping, to admire the beautiful architecture, or to get an iPad at the new Apple Store, Grand Central has something for everyone.